It's good to speak with you again today, Tom. I look forward to hearing your views on recriminations, your article, The Need to Reevaluate Manufacturing, Offshoring, and Outsourcing. Can you start by providing a brief background of yourself?
Yeah, I'm Tom Tanel. I'm the president and CEO of CATTAN Services Group. We are a logistics and supply chain consultancy and training firm, specialized in purchasing and procurement and supply management, distribution, freight transportation, warehousing, materials handling. And I've been doing this now, let's see, been involved in the business for about 38 years.
Thank you. Can you talk about offshoring versus onshoring? So, what is going on at the time, the present?
That's an excellent question. I think people are probably are getting more confused. And I think it's been a phenomenon we've been working with. It's increasingly popular now for companies to claim they're reevaluating offshoring and the outsourcing of manufacturing as well as other services. I'm sure everybody has heard the terms onshoring, nearshoring, right-shoring, and probably you're kind of dazed and confused at the same time. And part of it has to do with making sourcing decisions and the due diligence that's involved. And people years back started to make these wholesale moves to outsource their functions based upon the fact that it's cheaper to do things overseas. And I think people have found out over the years that may or may not be true. And in today's world or environment, those enamored by lower labor costs, lax environmental conditions, have actually moved a lot of our manufacturing overseas. And those signs have been there for a long time, and that's also because people have viewed what's called low-cost country sourcing. People also call best cost country sourcing, and now the new terminology is best value country sourcing. And I still think that people have some confusion when it regards what's there, and when people talk competitive advantage, where does it reside? You know, where do you manufacture products? What place should you do it around the world where it allows you to still satisfy both your internal and external customers and your constituencies that you're dealing with? So I think that's a big problem today. I think the offshoring phenomenon has deep roots and long-term implications that, unfortunately, I think a lot of the people who were the proponents originally going back 10, 15 years ago didn't understand some of the implications of that. And we've, as a result, have been profoundly impacted by the phenomenon. And I think the global financial crisis back in 2008, 2009 kind of brought some of these things to the head where people started to say, let me look out what's happening out there as far as the potential for what's happening. I think it's important to understand some of the counter strategies to offshoring and some of the terminology that's being bantered around out there. For example, some people refer to something called onshoring, which is actually the transfer of business process or service to non-metropolitan areas in the same country as your business is in. But the cost of labor and operations are lower. Example, Boeing recently moved a lot of their airplane manufacturing to the Carolinas because the right to work states to avoid Washington state where they manufacturing pretty much resided for Boeing, which is heavily unionized. Nearshoring is moving the business process to a foreign country that's really close by. For example, now you're seeing things coming back to, say, Mexico or Central America. That's called nearshoring. Another term that you hear people use is backshoring, kind of the trend of returning manufacturing an offshore location back to the home country where it was originally based. I'm sure you've heard, anybody who has read in the newspapers, industry magazines, companies like Hearst, Masterlock, GE Appliance, NCR, Otis Elevator, for examples, are making transition to bring things back to the U.S. that they had previously sent out of the U.S. And that's kind of an important thing. And then the last term that you hear is reshoring, which is backshoring, which could lead to onshoring, that's lower cost locations in the home country, or nearshoring, which are lower cost options in a home country specific geographic region. And you're seeing things coming back now to the Caribbean Basin, Mexico, Central America, even South America, where some of that stuff had moved on. So, and China no longer is going to be the only place where things are done because their labor costs have increased as well. So people are looking at areas in Southeast Asia, India, for example, as being countries that might be a better source to offshore as well. One of the things I think that's happening today is a lot of companies have realized that having offshored much of the manufacturing and supply away from where the demand locations has hurt their ability to meet expectations. And when you start looking at the lead times that you have, the problem has been that low-cost country sourcing in the last decade, few people have questioned the wisdom until recently. And a lot of guys are just looking at what the price was, and we're looking at the total landed cost, the total cost of acquisition. You're even making what we call a good old shit cost challenge. So there's actually been a paradigm shift. There's been an evolution, what we call low-cost country sourcing, which is a sourcing approach based upon the selection of supply in view of any cost advantages and the exploitation of what they call labor arbitrage, which is cheap labor. You know, they have bodies versus, say, automation. That was pretty good from 1980 to about 2001. Then about 2002 to the present, the term changed around to the best cost country sourcing. Started really to catch on, I would say, about when the financial crisis happened, is where you have cost-driven sourcing strategies based upon total cost of ownership and some of the qualitative factors. More of a long-term approach versus low-cost country sourcing was kind of an outsourcing short-term strategy approach. Today, the new term that you hear bantered around is what's called best value country sourcing, which is the sourcing approach based upon total cost of ownership that you had previously, but looking at the qualitative areas, but also looking at the logistical factors. And that, when you look at that, that's more of an approach that's more what's sustainable and what can be done, and also possibly switching a source that you have in one area. Say, I might have something in Southeast Asia, which I move to Eastern Europe, or vice versa. I think a low-cost country, for example, today is not automatically a best-cost country for a certain product category, company, or even industry today. Probably, I think a lot of this is most effective right now, the industries where you really see it affecting electronics, consumer goods, the retail sector. As our marketplace becomes a lot more dynamic, we're driving further that word the people here bantered around, commoditization. Global players are pushed to compete not only on innovation and cost, but on flexibility and the ability to interact with people. An individual best value country sourcing criteria has gained massively in importance. Probably the biggest area you have a concern is the lack of environmental standards. You know, people don't want to talk about that, but a lot of places that people have outsourced to, they don't have the same things you have here, which increase the cost, even legal uncertainties. You know, just look at intellectual property. I always think of China, where Apple found out they had Apple stores in China that they were unaware of. The other area I think that you have is the labor phenomenons, and jobs are moved to nations where the labor and cost of doing business is inexpensive. And impoverished labor moves to nations with higher paying jobs. For example, if you go to the Middle East and you look at most of the populations doing the work, in some cases, 40, 50, 60% of the people who are doing the work are not native to that country. So they're bringing in people to get the job done. Places like India, Philippines, etc. In addition to the rising labor and input costs, I think some of the issues that where people are now looking at or addressing are the impact of longer supply chains, shipping reaction times, inventory carrying cost. If you have something coming from China to the middle part of the United States, you're talking probably 60, 75 days in the pipeline. Just think of the inventory that you have to maintain, the cost to carry that inventory, to do that as well. I think a lot of this is kind of true, and I think that companies are sourcing more capital equipment from some of these regions to reduce their overall capital expenditures. Things like pumps, chemical plant equipment, storage tanks, blast furnaces, for example. And many of the multinationals involved in mining, oil, and explorations are sourcing big-ticket capital equipment from low-cost countries for use not only in those countries, but even in the Western areas that are happening out there today. I think if you take a look at the total landed manufacturing cost is still a continuing factor in company site selections. People have to consider the cost of the raw material and components, the cost to manufacture it, the transportation and logistics, the inventory, investment and carrying costs, as well as taxes and duties. Projections vary widely depending upon the company and the industry, but anyone who has a high labor cost component of total landed cost, there's still financial advantages of offshoring things, and they're very compelling and sustainable. In other areas, companies may have to reevaluate their sourcing decisions based upon changes in regional market conditions and also the cost gap, and in some cases, domestic manufacturing may or may not be feasible. People don't think about that if you send things out of the U.S., where is that capacity? Just to bring a plant back online as well as expertise. Any other questions, Dustin?
Yeah, I think this is great, and thank you for sharing your views today on the topic of nearshoring and offshoring and the need to reevaluate manufacturing, whether it's offshoring or outsourcing.
Yeah, and if anybody can understand those terms, we'd be all in great shape. I appreciate the time spending with you, Dustin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.